Hey folks, and welcome back to Dungeons and Drybrushing. If you haven't been here before, my name is Daniel. Welcome. I've got a fun one for us today. I picked up this at my local dollar store. It is a $3.50 build-your-own log cabin kit meant for children 3 and up. So I should be able to handle it. I've seen this kit there before, and I just walked on by it. It seemed like it was going to be a lot of work to fix it, to bring it up to the standards that I use for D&D, and honestly, all the steps that I would have to take to do that are things I don't really like doing, like texturing wood. But it stuck in my head that it would make a good project, that it might be fun to try, that it might even give a good result. And it just kept going and going, and so this time when I was there, I picked it up. And now I'm just going to dive in and see how it goes. Let's get started. The first step anytime I'm making this kind of model, even one as simple as this, is to dry fit it. That is, putting it together as much as I can, but without glue. I know some of you are thinking that, hey, this is a children's model, you don't need to bother. It's going to be super simple. And maybe you're right, but dry fitting is free, it only takes a minute, and it lets you know what you're working with ahead of time. So it's a good habit to get into. When I'm working with wood, I do like to texture it. I was kind of hoping that this would be soft enough to take texture from a stiff wire brush, but it doesn't. And it's not close. Ah well. So plan B is to do this part with a knife. Personally, I do like to add more texture to wood if I'm using it because a modern milled piece of doweling just isn't going to have the texture of a log cabin. But if you're not comfortable with a knife, you can absolutely skip this part. And there are other good reasons to skip this too. It's boring, it's one of the longest parts of the project, and ultimately I'm not sure anyone but me notices the extra texture. So choose wisely. Okay, so that took a little longer than I would have liked, but it's textured now. I'm going to use some contrast paints on this and some washes, so that extra step will give those paints something to highlight and bring out when we use them. That said, a little note on safety. As I've said in earlier videos, the safest way to cut is the way that you are most comfortable. I know people say never cut towards yourself. That is not really true. If you have good knife control and a strong skill set with a knife, it's perfectly safe to cut towards yourself as long as it's in a controlled motion. With all of our pieces textured, the next step is assembly. For most of this, I'm going to be using tacky glue. It grabs quickly, has a relatively strong bond, and it's easy to use. For the last few pieces though, I do move to my hot glue gun. These pieces of wood are not particularly straight, so rather than clamp them and wait hours for it to dry, I'm just going to use hot glue and hold them in place. Sometimes brute force really does work. Once I have those pieces on, I ultimately do decide, after some debate, to glue the roof panels together, but I don't glue them to the building. It would just be in the way when painting everything, so I'll glue the roof on later when I'm finished fixing it. With the glue dry, it's time to start painting. I'm going to use skeleton horde contrast paint for the log cabin. I really like this color on actual wood, and it being a contrast paint, it helps to bring out the little micro textures that are already built into the wood pieces, as well as the ones we added. But if you don't have contrast paints, you can use a watered down acrylic craft paint and rely on washes to help bring those details out. Either way, just make sure to get a solid base coat over the entire cabin. Personally, I skip doing the inside because I won't be using that for play, but if you will, then go ahead and do that too. Now it's time to fix the texture on the roof, or really the complete lack of texture. This kit provides just 2 flat wooden panels for the roof of the log cabin, but we can do better than that and without adding anything to the cost. I went to my recycling bin and grabbed an old cereal box. I used my paper cutter to cut this into thin strips, but it would be just as easy to do with a ruler and some scissors if that's what you have. Once I've got some thin strips of cardstock, I just line 2 or 3 of them up with each other and start cutting slits in the cardboard. This is supposed to look kind of rough and ready, so I don't want them to be precise. I don't measure them exactly or cut them all at the same depth. If it's a bit haphazard, then that's even better. And then you cut the next strip of shingles. And the next strip. And the next strip. Then it's back to the tacky glue to glue these in overlap strips starting at the bottom of the roof panels and working up. I like to let them overhang on either side and cut them to fit after, rather than just trying to cut them to size beforehand. These don't have to be perfectly straight as you glue them on either. I just kind of eyeball. I promise, if you're the one crafting something, you're looking at it way harder than anyone else is likely to. So if it looks straight to you, it's straight enough. And then, back to cutting strips for the other side of the roof. Alright, so here's the secret about cutting and applying shingles like this. It is actually a blast. It's the best time you can have crafting and a phenomenal way to kill an afternoon. Can you guys tell when I'm lying? Okay, this actually kind of sucks. This part's just menial repetitive labor. For me, this is the worst part of doing this kind of build, but we all like different things. Some people don't like painting, some people don't like the build process, and they love painting. Some of us are just here so that we can have stuff on the table when we play our games. It's all valid, just put on a TV show and do your best to get through it. So it takes some time, but eventually the entire rooftop does get shingled. But now there are some more issues. They gave me some windows, a door, and a chimney that are just flat wooden panels, and that just isn't going to cut it. So I looked through my craft supplies and I found one of my favorite free materials to work with, egg carton. If you've seen my older videos, you already know what's coming. The egg carton gets cut into rock shapes and they get pasted into the chimney. This stuff is so easy to work with and the built-in texture is amazing. On top of that, tacky glue holds it perfectly, and it can actually be bent around corners and still hold effectively. As underrated free materials go, egg carton is top of the line. I decided not to even use the door that came with the kit. It's too flat, too thick, and just not really bringing anything to the party. So instead I got out this bag of matchsticks and I'm going to construct a simple door out of them. I sized them up against the log cabin itself to see what a reasonable size for the door is, and then just roughly cut a few of them to the right height. Again, if it's a bit shaky looking, it doesn't really matter. That's the vibe for a ramshackle old cabin. Once I have enough of them cut, I secure them together by gluing 2 more matchsticks across their length like wooden braces. And that's our door. I used the same matchsticks to frame out the windows that were provided in the kit. It's not a perfect solution, but it does add enough texture, I think, to make them fit in with the build. And once the glue is dry, all of those additional pieces get the same coat of skeleton horde that the cabin did. As you can see, the contrast paints are a great first step in bringing out all of the details and making them pop. Once the paint is dry, it's time to glue the details in place. Just make sure to get these where you want them, especially if you're using a very strong glue. You don't want to have to pry things off and risk breaking them. Then it's finally time to start on the rooftop. First, everything gets coated in black craft paint. This gives a consistent base coat to work from and also ensures that any spots I miss or mistakes I make will be harder to spot. While that's drying, I use the time to base coat the chimney and all of the stones in light gray as well. The next step of the roof is coming in to stipple on a dark blue. I'm really not looking for consistent coverage here. I want it to look old and weathered, so the first layer just gets stippled on roughly, covering about 80 to 90% of the roof and not worrying too much about how it looks just yet. The next layer gets done the same way, moving up to a brighter blue. I stipple it on very roughly, covering 70 to 80% of the dark blue this time. I want to save myself time by doing the dry brushing steps all at once, so I make sure that the stones of the chimney are painted a darker gray at this point too. And then, dry brushing. Dry brushing everything. The cabin, the doors, the windows, the rooftop, the chimney, all of it. I just use one off-white paint and go over absolutely every detail. Now I know that can be nerve-wracking to do if you're a new crafter or painter, especially since this white is going to look really bright at the first step. But don't worry, the washes that come afterwards always knock this color back down, and the 2 steps together help not only to bring out details, but to unify your paint scheme. Then it's time for the star of the show, the washes. I start with my homemade black wash. This is really nothing special, just a bit of black acrylic paint, dish soap, and water, and I slather it on everywhere. Just like the dry brushing, you want to make sure to hit everything with this. You can take your time and make sure it doesn't pool anywhere you don't want it to, of course, but washes are really the secret to bringing out texture in something like this. And the secret to making a good YouTube video is making sure you do everything in frame. So, yeah. Sorry about that. And if the black wash is magic, then this is casting a spell as a bonus action. I take some of Army Painter's green wash and I paint it around the bottom of the cabin, and splotch a little randomly on the rooftop. This is going to help give it a worn look, like it has been out in the elements, and it also sets us up for the step after this one. If you don't have this particular green wash, then a homemade one works just fine too. Then it's time for the step that's really going to bring it up to the next level. That's right, it's time for a bit of moss. I just take the leftovers from other projects that I've used flocking on so that it's a mix of colors, and I stir it up with a generous helping of PVA glue. There's no exact ratio for this, to say the least. Even saying that I eyeball it would be, well, pretty generous. Really, I just knock some old flocking in, pour glue until it feels right, and stir it up. Precision is not required for this step, which is part of what makes it fun. The other part of what makes it fun is smearing it everywhere you think it will look good. I can't explain it, there's just something satisfying about indulging your inner child and smearing green goop everywhere. But I'd love to say that I use this moss or algae, whatever it is, sparingly and realistically. But I don't. I've said it before and I will say it again, I'm sure the fantasy is more important than the reality for this kind of thing. Just smear it on until you think it looks cool. And once all that PVA glue is completely dry, well, here's what we're left with. Okay folks, so that's pretty much it for this one, and honestly, I couldn't be happier with how this turned out. For $3.50, we got a pretty badass log cabin that we can use in our campaigns. This could easily be the place where a helpful ranger NPC lives in the woods or the swamp, because, let's face it, your players are probably lost. Mine always are. Hey guys. Or it could be, the place where a wizened hag lives, looking to turn your PCs into adventurer chowder. Either way, it's difficult to beat that price point for a building for D&D, and it was also a fun project where I got to practice a few different skill sets. Alright, I also want to say thank you to everyone who's recently subscribed. There's been a big surge in subscriber numbers and in views, especially even on some older videos, and that's just fantastic and definitely encourages me to keep going with what I'm doing. So thank you all for watching and for the awesome comments. Please like and subscribe. And also, I have dropped a link in the description to buymeacoffee.com if you want to support the site, support what I'm doing here, help defray the costs of the hobby stuff, then that's a great way to do it. No pressure, more content coming either way. Thank you. And I'll see you on the next one.